are roaming loose, and a pistol is a poor thing to stop such wicked rascals on a lone hillside. Come, come, thou dost not want a peace to guard thee. They will not hurt a boy. He had the guinea between his finger and thumb, and the gleam of the gold was too strong to be withstood. So we gained a sorry matchlock, slugs, and powder, and the boy walked off over the furrow, whistling with his hand in his pocket, and a guinea and a crown piece in his hand. His whistle sounded innocent enough, yet I mistrusted him, having caught his eye while he was looking at my bloody foot, and so I said as much to Elzevir, who only laughed, saying the boy was simple and harmless. But from where I sat I could peep out through the brambles in the open gap, and see without being seen, and there was my young gentleman walking carelessly enough, and whistling like any bird so long as Elzevir's head was above the wall. But when Elzevir sat down, the boy gave a careful look round, and seeing no one watching any more, dropped his whistling and made off as fast as his heels would carry him. Then I knew that he had guessed who we were, and was off to warn the hue and cry. But before Elzevir was on his feet again, the boy was out of sight, over the hill brow. "Let us move on," said Block. "'Tis but a little distance now to go, and the heat is past already. We must have slept 3 hours or more, for thou art but a sorry watchman, John. 'Tis when the sentry sleeps that the enemy laughs, and for thee the posse might have had us both like daylight owls." With that, he took me on his back and made off with a lusty stride, keeping as much as possible under the brow of the hill and in the shelter of the walls. We had slept longer than we thought, for the sun was westering fast, and though the rest had refreshed me, my leg had grown stiff and hurt the more in dangling when we started again. Elzevir was still walking strongly, in spite of the heavy burden he carried, and in less than half an hour I knew, though I had never been there before, we were in the land of the old marble quarries at the back of Anvil Point. Although I knew little of these quarries, and certainly was in evil plight to take note of anything at that time, yet afterwards I learnt much about them. Out of such excavations comes that black Purbeck marble which you see in old churches in our country, and I am told in other parts of England as well. And the way of making a marble quarry is to sink a tunnel, slanting very steeply down into the earth, like a well turned askew, till you reach 50, 70, or perhaps 100 feet deep. Then, from the bottom of this shaft there spread out narrow passages or tunnels, mostly 6 feet high, but sometimes only 3 or 4, and in these the marble is dug. These quarries were made by men centuries ago, some say by the Romans themselves, and though some are still worked in other parts of Purbeck, those at the back of Anvil Point have been disused beyond the memory of man. We had left the stony village fields, and the face of the country was covered once more with the closest sward, which was just putting on the brighter green of spring. This turf was not smooth, but hummocky, for under it lay heaps of worthless stone and marble drawn out of the quarries ages ago, which the green vestment had covered for the most part, though it left sometimes a little patch of broken rubble peering out at the top of the mound. There were many tumble-down walls and low gables left at the cottages of the old quarrymen. Grass-covered ridges marked out the little garden folds, and here and there still stood a forlorn gooseberry bush, or a stunted plum or apple tree, with its branches all swept eastward by the up-channel gales. As for the quarry shafts themselves, they too were covered round the tips with the green turf, and down them led a narrow flight of steep-cut steps, with a slide of soapstone at the side, on which the marble blocks were once hauled up by wooden winches. Down these steps no feet ever walked now, for not only were suffocating gases said to beset the bottom of these shafts, but men would have it that in the narrow passages below lurked evil spirits and demons. One who ought to know about such things told me that when St. Aldhelm first came to Purbeck, he bound the old pagan gods under a ban deep in these passages, but that the worst of all the crew was a certain demon called the Mandrive, who walked over the best of the black marble. And that was why such marble might only be used in churches or for graves, for if it were not for this holy purpose, the Mandrive would have power to strangle the man that hewed it. It was by the side of one of these old shafts that Elzevir laid me down at last. The light was very low, showing all the little unevenness of the turf, and the sward crept over the edges of the hole, and every crack and crevice in steps and slide was green with ferns. The green ferns shrouded the walls of the hole, and ruddy brown brambles overgrew the steps, till all was lost in the gloom that hung at the bottom of the pit. Elzevir drew a deep breath or two of the cool evening air, like a man who has come through a difficult trial. "There," he said, "this is Joseph's pit, and here we must lie hid until thy foot is sound again. Once get to the bottom safe, and we can laugh at posse, and hue and cry, and at the King's Crown itself. They cannot search all the quarries, and are not like to search any of them, for they are cowards at the best, and hang much on tales of the Mandrive. Aye, and such tales are true enough, for there lurk gases at the bottom of most of the shafts, like devils to strangle any that go down. And if they do come down this Joseph's pit, we still have 19 chances in a score they cannot thread the workings. But last, if they come down, and thread the path, there is his pistol and a rusty matchlock, and before they come to where we lie, we can hold the troop at bay and sell our lives so dear they will not care to buy them." We waited a few minutes, and then he took me in his arms and began to descend the steps, back first, as one goes down a hatchway. The sun was setting in a heavy bank of clouds just as we began to go down, and I could not help remembering how I had seen it set over peaceful Moonfleet only 24 hours ago, and how far off we were now, and how long it was likely to be before I saw that dear village and Grace again. The stairs were still sharp-cut and little worn, but Elzevir paid great care to his feet, lest he should slip on the ferns and mosses with which they were overgrown. When we reached the brambles, he met them with his back, and though I heard the thorns tearing his coat, he shoved them aside with his broad shoulders, and screened my dangling leg from getting caught. Thus he came safe without stumble to the bottom of the pit. When we got there, all was dark, but he stepped off into a narrow opening on the right hand, and walked on as if he knew the way. I could see nothing, but perceived that we were passing through endless galleries cut in the solid rock, high enough, for the most part, to allow of walking upright, but sometimes so low as to force him to bend down and carry me in a very constrained attitude. Only twice did he set me down at a turning while he took out his tinder box and lit a match. But at length the darkness became less dark, and I saw that we were in a large cave, or room, into which the light came through some opening at the far end. At the same time, I felt a colder breath and fresh salt smell in the air that told me we were very near the sea. End of Chapter 10, Part 2.